African founders. Well, it was mostly African, but also some Southeast Asian and Indian founders, but up on Zoom with global investors and had them pitch not only for exposure, obviously, and feedback, but for funding. And it took off. I don't think the team really even expected the success that would come of it, or really just the interest.
What are you talking about, Lundy? It was totally planned from the very beginning, the entire time.
That's true, right? You knew that $2 million in investment would be committed through
almost 3, in fact. Over 3.
Yeah, over 30
and
episodes.
For over 20, close to 30 companies from over a dozen countries around the world. So, you know, I think one of the big learnings that I had in launching the Nest was how important it was to have people have conversations face to face, even if it's via Zoom.
Right.
And how difficult that is normally in real life. You know, you have visa, you have to get a visa, you have to buy a plane ticket, you have to get into a conference. Then the investors are sitting over there in a VIP room. How do you finagle your way in there? And once you do that, you know, all the known investors are surrounded by dozens of entrepreneurs. So, you know, for most people, it just doesn't work. And so creating this forum for people to have direct conversations was groundbreaking in my mind. It really opened the eyes of many investors to say, wow. And, you know, I'm going to say something perhaps a little sensitive, but wow, there really is a market in Africa. Wow, there really are great entrepreneurs in Africa. So, you know, getting away from this, you know, neo-colonial mindset and really thinking much more about, oh, wow, this is a real investment opportunity.
Right, absolutely. Investment over charity or philanthropy, and yeah, having that kind of not necessarily education piece, but really just exposure to those conversations that otherwise they wouldn't have. Exactly. So
exactly.
Yeah, in 2021 now, things still, I mean, obviously look a little different, but we're hoping to expand our reach with the Nest this year. Hopefully, once things are safe, introducing some more in-person elements to the events in cities around the world once we can, and kind of transition into a bigger monthly forum rather than weekly, because I know that the weekly events were a grind. So that was a lot of back to back to back. So anyone who's interested in learning more about that and the Nest and kind of Untapped and joining our community, we're on Twitter at Find the Nest. We're in the middle of a website overhaul, so eventually we'll be plugging our website. But really curious, I'm very excited for this conversation to kind of hear about the resurgence, or I don't know, the adaptation of old technologies specifically here, because typically
and we have Chris online. So Chris Fornoff, welcome to the chat room. Hi, Chris, are you there?
Hello, all. Really happy to be here.
Great,
Hi,
great
Chris.
to have you. And so Chris and I were having a chat about the Clubhouse and about Untapped and what he was doing. And it occurred to us that there's some great technologies out there that are from decades or even centuries old, that especially when combined with newer technologies around digital monitoring and IoT are completely revitalized. And so what we thought we would do today was to really bring some old technologists, new technologists, and really have a conversation about what are some of the opportunities to create appropriate technology in emerging markets. But we're getting our head of ourselves a little bit because we're still 2 minutes away from start. And so I think I would hold off on introductions until we get started officially at 8 a.m. Pacific.
Cool, no problem. Is anyone, I feel like a teacher whenever I'm like, is anyone in the audience, or like raise your hand if, but I would be really curious what percentage of the audience, because we have, I don't know, 24 people here, are based on the continent or are founders on the continent, specific to Africa. Anyone in South Africa here with me who wants to kind of, I don't know, pitch yourself just before we get started? I feel like we could get some audience participation, or otherwise we'll just give it another minute. I've never actually done that before. I don't know if I did that right.
Part of the joy of these things is basically experimenting with all the different form factors for moderation and for
Right.
groups
Yeah, exactly.
community discussions. It's really fascinating seeing how many different ways you can run.
Yeah, and I really want to make it clear that what we want here is open conversation. So anybody can join this conversation. If you raise your hand, we'd be happy to bring you on board. That said, we will have, Chris will be bringing some folks on as well. So Chris, feel free to add whoever you like, panelists you've invited, and we can go from there. Well, as soon as they join.
Indeed. Part of the challenge is I found out that like through the people, I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be great. It's gonna be a great discussion with everything. Found out that essentially they have Android devices. So it's like, okay, well, I can get one overnight with things. And so there's a little bit of a challenge with things, but we should have some good people flying in here.
Excellent, excellent. We're gonna start in 30 seconds. And just to remind everybody, we are live streaming this event and it will also be recorded. So just to let you know. And I'll be reminding folks throughout the session. And if you do want to participate in the text chat via the LinkedIn event that we have online, please search for the Nest Investment Network, and you will see it as one of the main events for today. And we will do our very, very best to bring relevant comments that are chatted through either the live stream or the LinkedIn page onto this conversation.
Excellent.
Great. Well, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Jim Chu, and I am the CEO of Untapped. We host a investment community called The Nest, where we try to bring together investors from around the world and connecting them to frontier market entrepreneurs in Africa, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. And our goal really is to create robust conversations about what's happening with investment and entrepreneurship in these markets, and hopefully create real connections and real conversations. And with that, our topic for today is something that is very relevant to developing markets. And that is, what is the role of technology and what is appropriate technology? And to what extent can old technologies be revitalized to be applicable today? So I have Chris Fornoff. We have the honor of having Chris Fornoff on the chat today, on the Clubhouse today. And he has assembled an interesting set of technology experts, both high and low tech experts, to talk about some of the interesting opportunities available today. So I'll hand it over to you, Chris, and let's get started.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining. So this is an interesting topic. I spent a lot of time in this sector basically looking for what's possible. I also want to give some little chance for introductions with Ken and Sandra with things. And for anyone else in the audience, by the way, this is like Jim was saying, this is an open discussion. If anyone basically would like to jump in, feel free to raise your hand. We want to keep the ideas flowing here. I do have a lot to say on the subject for things, and I don't want to dominate the discussion with things, but it is something that I care a lot about. And a lot of the knowledge I have is something that you got to go through some very strange life experiences to acquire with things. And I think some of people here might appreciate some of these things. So anyways, let's get started on this. So when we're talking about developing technologies, we're talking about old technology versus new. This is actually something of a dichotomy, because one of the central tenets that we have with technology is that it always gets better. You come up with a new thing and then it replaces the old, and then you get like a 10% improvement, 20% here. And every once in a while you get a big breakthrough or a revolution, and then it's so much better than everything that came before. The computers are so much better than the factories, and you get like, it's okay, we went from this material to this material, so much better. One of the most shocking things is that when you go back to basics and you start looking at the core of where these things come from, you start finding some very strange things in history. Part of the things about developing with technology that's one of those stranger obsessions is that you end up having a focus towards the future. A lot of people get started in this going and saying, hey, I want to do spaceships, I want to do robots, I want to do like all this super futuristic stuff. And what's interesting is there's always this trend for what's going to come into the future. What I find fascinating is we don't have a monopoly on smart people that are just born today. there happen to be more in the world just as a general function of population growth. But there have been people all throughout history that have had amazing ideas and amazing adventures and amazing experiences and very, very fascinating ideas about how to build things. What's interesting is that because technologists typically look towards the future, we have something of a blind spot for where we've come from in the past. And what's interesting about this is when you start looking at the basis of where any technology comes from, where any science comes from. What I've done as something of a specialty is whenever I find out a new technology or just any technology, I'll go back and go, okay, who is the original people that created this? Where did they get their stuff from? What were their childhood experiences? The basic idea is going back and trying to find out how did people come up with new things? And one of the weirder things you end up finding about is every time we basically go through one of these technological transformations, it's mostly an improvement most of the time, but there's often a lot of perfectly valid other pathways that we didn't really follow up on. You see some of this kind of in the culture where they talk about steampunk, you know, where they start talking about like reimagining what would happen if we did slightly different things during the Industrial Revolution. And what's interesting about this is that you end up finding out that there's a lot of things that we could have built that we didn't. And technically we still could, it just wouldn't really make a lot of sense in our current context. And this is where you start discovering that a number of technologies that we create aren't actually the best according to an arbitrary criteria. They're more of what we create to basically solve a specific set of problems. When the cultural context shifts, when the economic context shifts, the technology moves on with it. Now, we have a wider range of options to work with because that's one of the very cool things about technology is you can basically, it's, you know, mix and match recycle. However, what's very strange about this is that we often use the stuff that's saying, hey, look, here's the latest and greatest. There's a lot of very old things that were very, very powerful that we just don't use these days that actually can still be used and have massive implications. When we're talking about Africa, one of the things that's come up repeatedly in rooms and discussions has been this idea of Africa does not have to follow the same development model that the West did. It's not guaranteed, it's not required that we basically follow a like everyone in the world's going to basically say, oh, if you want to basically have a society where essentially here's how the people work and live and play, this is essentially how it's built. There's many ways of accomplishing these objectives. And, you know, I would argue positive that there's often not enough consideration done to the things that we leave behind. As a point, the Amish actually have an interesting spin on this, where essentially they will spend an enormous amount of time considering out, hey, if we get bicycles in our community, what will that do? Well, that means that we're going to increase the distance people can go and say, but then they might take people farther away than others with stuff. Maybe we don't want bicycles in our community. Oh wait, but horses are different with things. They'll go piece by piece and decide what technologies they're going to use in their communities. And then through authoritarian, extreme social pressure and shame culture, they'll basically ensure that essentially those decisions are honored to the most part. Each Amish community actually runs with a slightly different variation of what they're doing. But I find that idea of selectively choosing the technologies that you use and why is a very different model from how we might say the way we say, hey, look, the latest and greatest thing came out from Apple or from a tech company. You're all getting auto updated tonight, and this is how everything's going to run. We have the idea that we've lost is one of agency. You know, we talk about how the individual is empowered now like never before because you can jump online and all of a sudden you can create tools and all these programming things and you can do all this amazing stuff. One of the things that we've lost though, and one of the things I caution people that are basically looking at crafting basic patterns for civilization in other countries is be aware of the things that you're giving up along the way. For one example, the community factor is something that has been, this was a problem before the pandemic. And at least in the United States of America, this is something that essentially has only gotten more painful. And I think I'm at least a little bit more hopeful that some of these extended community ties with something slightly extended after the pandemic is over, because people will at least acknowledge more of the value of it. But I don't know. These are one of these things where the technologies we create have very specific effects in the culture. And one thing to consider is what those effects are.
So Chris, maybe we can just jump into some very specific examples of technologies that you might have seen that may have been discarded from ages ago, but now have been revitalized due to combination with newer technologies.
Yes, sorry, I got a little ranty there, but yes, I'm going back to things. So as an example, so if you actually pull to refresh with things, and you can actually see my profile picture, I've got this picture here of something called an aerial ropeway. And this is a very interesting version of one of these technologies that a lot of people don't realize is still in use, but the places that's in use is a very interesting thing. So when you make a road, you're going from one place to another, right? The thing is that you have to maintain it, and you have to lay down the dirt and everything. But the other thing is you need to basically continuously have either carts or donkeys or combustion engines or electric motors. One thing that's fascinating about aerial ropeways is something that you can set up anywhere in the world, even in very, very mountainous terrain, and transport extraordinarily large amounts of cargo from point A to point B. The Dutch did a lot of experiments with this in the 1600s to the point where they could move cargo, from one side of a region to another. You can go we're talking 30, 40 kilometers. Like, it's insane the distances you can have on this. That's basically a fully automated transport system that basically, and here's one of the coolest parts, it powers itself. If you have basically a slight delineation on the, where it's going downhill, the thing powers itself with gravity, just by the heavy loads. This was used to basically transform entire regions with mining. It's still used today, not just on ski lifts. It's the same kind of technology in the gondola, but it's actually one of the biggest places used actually is in logging operations for basically going in the middle of nowhere and moving tons of cargo from off the mountain and top with cut down trees. What's fascinating about this is that when you start looking at the energy loads of all these different forms of transportation, everything from electric vehicles to airplanes to bikes and all these other different things. One of the things that's fascinating about ropeways is this is just an example of one technology that actually on an energy joules per kilogram moved, it's actually among the most efficient that's out there. And yet when we have our discussions about how you develop your transportation infrastructure, this is an example of something that's just not even considered typically. On the other hand, if you're in Chile or someplace in the region, it's caught on like wildfire down there. They have, in the main city capital, they have like 18 of these things just going on like you would have a subway in a typical city. These are the technologies that essentially are all around us that are so pervasive that they've almost become invisible, and many of them are very old. The more that we can go back into the archives and basically get some of these technologies available, we will get inspiration for the things that we invest in and we build in today. Other technologies might include everything from insulation technologies for efficient thermal design to solar power to essentially for pumping. There's an enormous number of technologies that are out there. And I want to I've rented a little bit here with things. I kind of want to open it up to the group here. Jim, maybe turn it over to you actually with things. There's a number of technologies that we could explore for basically things that can really transform the continent with Africa and individual countries inside. What are some areas do you think we could take this discussion next?
Well, I think because this is an investment forum, I think we're most interested in technologies that can have immediate commercial application and things that can even are even investable. So what have you seen that potentially has interesting commercial applications in emerging markets, and perhaps even some that have already started becoming commercialized and are investment ready?
Sure. So actually, this is a very exciting one. Two technologies I'd like to cover here are, and Joe, I know you have some flair with this with things, but solar-powered refrigeration and solar-powered pumps. Just saying this is these are some of the more exciting things I've seen, and the reasons why are actually very interesting. So solar panel prices have basically been dropping by orders of magnitude. We all have seen the amazing things that have been happening in that sector. By the way, a piece of information a lot of people don't realize, solar panels still have a lot more research runway. Like we were going to be seeing price reductions for at least the next decade or two from innovations still making their way into the manufacturing line. One of the coolest ones I've seen is actually called bifacial technology. You can literally, turns out you can basically leave the back of half of the solar panel off, and it still generates 90% of the same energy as the front, even if it's facing directly away from the sun and you have them, lined up and you can reflect off each other. Basically, short version, solar panels can easily be made 60% more efficient by reducing the number of materials. The only reason why it's not on every solar panel right now is just purely based on capital commitments, and essentially they're just rolling out upgrades everywhere. So that's coming down the pipeline. But even if you have the best solar panel efficiency ever, what you end up hooking it up to, the efficiency of the energy ends up basically affecting how large a solar panel you need, and mostly how large an investment you're going to need in capital expenditure. And when we think about solar panel, there's different kinds. We've got like the giant centralized facilities. We also have the decentralized, like little tiny, like, you know, here's on my village hut type kind of thing, or my suburban house, or my urban rooftop. One thing that's fascinating about this is that as an investment, we have the ability to mostly do utility scale investments for solar, but you also have the opportunity for something very interesting with people that would not typically have access to centralized grids. One technology that's completely transformed the Western world was one of refrigeration. This was a big breakthrough that happened around turn of the century, because for one of the first times when you harvest your crops, you bring in your meat, your food, your butchers. We had the ability to basically transport ice. Now, originally, ice was something that we had to bring all the way from India and the United States with things. I'm sorry, backwards. In India, they had to basically import ice all the way from USA.
And just to let you know, in many places in the world, ice is still the main mode of refrigeration. So I worked 10 years in Haiti, and you know, if you wake up early enough in the morning, there are massive trucks of people who are carrying blocks of ice from the main city out to the countryside, so that people can buy the ice and keep their food refrigerated. So it's something that is very it's very prevalent today throughout the world. You know, so I think a lot of people on the call or on this Clubhouse chat are very familiar with frontier markets, and also very familiar with PV or solar refrigeration. But you know, some of the more interesting technologies that I've come across lately is solar refrigeration that doesn't even rely on solar panels. So one company that I had the fortune of investing in Spirit Farms, uses solar thermal as a way to do refrigeration. Don't ask me to try to explain what the technology is, but there's no use of solar panels in this. But instead, they're using the thermal energy from solar to create refrigeration. And just like you're saying, Chris, they're using that off-grid system to essentially provide refrigeration services for faraway remote farmers. So quite interesting what's possible there. But you know, I think the holy grail really is a decentralized refrigeration of some kind. Now we've seen some interesting advances around decentralized refrigeration, because I do think, as you said, you know, having refrigeration more available to more people, both farmers and consumers, can really change things, whether that's for vaccine transport, for food storage, or for, you know, just general consumer use.
Consider hours per day saved. One of the things was there was a time I went to Bangladesh, and they have fruit stands, and these are essentially all throughout the country, essentially, but especially in Dhaka. Essentially, it's like the fruit markets, and one of the most wonderful fruits there is the jackfruit or durian fruit, which is it's an entire meal in fruit form. It's amazing. Giant seeds. You can get like you can feed a family off of one of these things. It's amazing. One of the challenges with it, though, is after 2 or 3 days, it immediately starts rotting. It basically does not last very long once it falls from the tree, and many of them fall from many, many trees. So what ends up happening is basically having this persistent ingrown of the food markets or fruit markets. You end up having this stench of just rotting fruit, which of course is not hygienic and does not help with the health factor. But it also means that you have a limit for how much you can stockpile the price.
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's an economic question, right? Because so many, you know, for those of us who've spent a lot of time in emerging markets, you know, the best time to buy fruit is at the end of the day, when you have incredible negotiating power. And so, you know, most farmers or local farmers have to throw away their crops at the end of the day, simply because there is no storage and refrigeration. But hey, Chris, really quick question for you. What is your Twitter handle? Our team is asking so that they can post a little bit about you and about this event.
I appreciate that. I am actually on Twitter. I am actually one of those weird people. I've run PR teams, I've run campaigns, but I've myself been disconnected from a lot of this stuff.
Gotcha. Well, just to remind everybody that we are live streaming this on YouTube and on LinkedIn. If you are looking for it and want to provide a live chat with us or with this conversation, go to the Nest Investment Community or Investment Network on LinkedIn, and you will find this event right on top. So so maybe it might be worthwhile mentioning the refrigeration company. It's called Inspira Farms, Inspira Farms, and they are based mostly in East Africa. That's where I met them, certainly, and most active there. But they have refrigeration units, off-grid, solar thermal powered refrigeration around the world, in Central America, in West Africa, in South Africa, and in East Africa. So look them up. They're an interesting company, not only because I'm an investor, full disclosure. But I want to mention, since you were talking a bit, Chris, about solar panels. One of the other interesting technologies that, again, a little bit back to basics here, that I came across and I'm moving forward with an investment in as well, is a company called Desolinator, and that's Desolanator, Desolinator. And that company is interesting because they're doing desalination now. We all know what desalination is. You're taking seawater or very brackish water and turning it into fresh drinking water. Most people use high energy sources, factory, generator, whatever, or even a big set of solar panels to power big old pumps that then push water through membranes called reverse osmosis membranes, that then you get fresh water. As you can imagine, it's extremely energy intensive. Well, one company, Desolinator, has decided, well, we're not going to do it that way. And they've realized that there's a lot of heat generated with solar panels. So they took good old solar panels that have been around for decades and put basically water tubes behind them to use both the energy from the solar panel as well as the heat generated by the solar thermal to distill water and turn it into drinkable, purified water. Amazing technology. They're doing this now at a fairly large scale. They have a plant in Dubai that produces clean drinking water at scale from brackish seawater. So again, that type of implementation, although physically and scientifically very, very easy, is just distilling with heat, wasn't possible until we're bringing together a bunch of different technologies. Of course, the solar technology, but also the ability to monitor those processes in real time via digital technologies. Without that, it wouldn't be a practical technology. So I see that as one really great example of how we've taken a really old idea, which is distillation and heat distillation, combined it with somewhat new technologies, solar panel, and really made it work and commercializable using some of the newest cost-effective things on the market, such as sensing and digital monitoring. So go ahead, please, Chris.
I was just going to riff on that, just saying that the one of the things that's amazing when you look through these steam engine designs and things from like the 1800s or so, one of the reoccurring themes is that it's not necessarily the power generation or the mechanical application of the problem being solved. Many times, one of the biggest challenges they had was actually the control systems. So they designed these exotic governors and like all these like complicated mechanisms to like sense when something was happening, and mechanical, essentially mechanical logic to basically dictate whether or not something was basically going to open or close with some valves and such. One of the things that's fascinating about this is that steam technology, as an example of an old technology, are relatively simple to make. You need essentially just to have metal, and you need to have the ability to affix it, weld it, and pressurize it essentially. When you compare this to essentially a lot of the ways that we make technologies today, where you basically buy components from 1,000 different vendors, it's like the screw comes from this place in China, this little bolt essentially comes from some European thing. Essentially, we have this idea of massive integration with global supply chains that stretch halfway across the planet. As pandemic showed us, a lot of these supply chains are very vulnerable, not just to economic disruption, but geopolitical as well. As we start basically looking at countries that are looking to basically industrialize or to basically create their own independent supply chains, older technologies have an advantage that they can be created with a much smaller footprint. However, here's the most exciting part. You can take these old technologies, and by putting very simple additions, so with us is simple, just throw a sensor, throw a chip onto it. However, all of a sudden, you now have an almost completely like 95% locally produced, manufactured design, everything design, working off of not open source, but just frankly freaking old stuff from like old books from the 1800s. And all of a sudden, it can outperform something you buy on the market that essentially is like, highest end German manufacturing or something, which is incredible, because this idea of something old, something new, something whatever, something blue, I think is what they say at the weddings, some variation of that. You essentially have this variation recipe you can use with revitalizing technology, where if you have an understanding of the basics and going back for the history of saying how can you use the oldest version of this technology, which often are much easier to scale, by the way, because you don't have to redo all the parts. It's just these large simple concepts. You put in a little bit of the new mixture with these advanced sensors or a little bit of electronics with things, because that was the thing they struggle with the most with the old designs. And then all of a sudden you have something inherently new that can do capabilities that you wouldn't have otherwise, that's locally sourced and supplied. And I find that just whole realm of ideas fascinating, because it means that we can have an excuse to basically rebuild everything with local supply chains.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear from other folks in the room as well, because I'm sure there's just a wealth of experience and knowledge about different technologies and successful implementations of them. If there's anybody in the audience that wants to raise their hand and participate or share an experience, please jump in. While we're waiting for folks who want to jump in, let me just tell you a little story. So as I mentioned, I worked and still do work in Haiti with clean water. And one of the first things that I noticed when we started doing implementations, that wherever we went, there was what I called an equipment graveyard, meaning folks that, or equipment that was implemented 6 months ago, 6 years ago, 60 years ago, that was just lying around doing nothing. And usually it's a typical thing where an outside organization, often at times an NGO, but often also commercial companies, come in and decide they want to put in something and put in a water treatment system. And then because it's completely foreign and completely unusable in the country, not unusable, but it needs loads of maintenance, supply chains, like you mentioned, that are very global and complicated, that after 6 months, 9 months, it stops working. And then the next piece of equipment comes back in, and that after 6 or 9 months stopped working. And before you know it, in a tiny little village in the southeast of Haiti, you have piles and piles of water treatment system unused, when simpler technologies could have been better managed and more effective.
You start seeing this pattern in a bunch of different places. I think I read a study that was something absurd, and Jim, please correct me on this, but it was something like the World Bank did a study on how many water pumps there are across all of Africa. And then they asked the follow-up question of how many of them are actually still working. It was something ridiculous. It was like 60% of the water wells installed just aren't operational.
Yeah,
this
yeah,
implies a very inefficient use of resources.
Yeah, for sure, and that's certainly another conversation. So Kamal Carter, I think you had your hand raised. Any comments from you? Please feel free to jump in.
Has he been invited to the stage?
Nope. Let me see if I can invite him to the stage. Yeah, there you go. Sorry about that. There, you're in. Kamal, can you hear us? No, guess not.
So while Jim works on that with things, one thing I want to open up to the audience just to consider, there are many different technologies that we can pursue. And if, by the way, please raise your hand essentially if you've got something to contribute to this conversation, because this is a fascinating topic that can take up a lot of time, but it's also something that there's an enormous set of opportunities involved. Because as investors, you have the ability to do all sorts. Oh, Alder's here. Okay, so just a real quick introduction for people. Alder essentially runs I'll let him explain what things, but he runs one of the coolest clubs on Clubhouse with advanced technology, and we've been going to a lot of each other's rooms with things. Alder, we're talking here about back to basics with old tech, essentially, and new applications. I think might be interesting combining with like the space tech stuff that we were talking about earlier, with and some of the ideas we've had with how older technologies can influence their new ones. Alder, you want to take it away?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for getting me into the room. Yeah, I suppose with the space angle. So we're working. A couple people on Clubhouse are working on a project where we can support a school in Nigeria and a school in America to teach girls how to grow this next generation of rocket scientists and space entrepreneurs. The reason I mention this is that one of the angles we're going at is through CubeSats, these small, inexpensive satellites that are useful for a variety of things, but specifically for agriculture. And this bridge between, the oldest technology humans have and one of the newest technologies, it's this really powerful thing that we hope will be able to kind of bring it down to people's everyday lives. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we got to think about how the most cutting edge tech can help our most basic needs.
Absolutely. So just, and if you're not familiar with this group and the conversation, so there's a lot of us here working and investing in frontier markets. So different markets in Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, etc. And before you arrived, we were talking about some of the newer some of the applications of older technologies, but also oftentimes combined with newer ones. So, for example, using solar thermal for off-grid refrigeration, but making that really possible and commercializable only because of the digital sensing that's available today. So I'm curious to hear from you. What are some technologies that you see, whether they be, I know you're a big advocate of 3D printing and others. What applications do you see in emerging markets that could be transformative?
Yeah. So I'll try. So I'll go back about 7 years ago, where I opened up my first 3D printing shop, which is in a small Vermont town, one stoplight, cows outnumbered people. But what we noticed is that this new technology, this 3D printing, was actually being used in folks' everyday lives. We made tractor parts, we made fishing lures, we made telescope parts, we made all kinds of things that can help people bridge. The reason I mention this is that now that we are starting to ship out our units, we make essentially 3D printing, milling, CNC factories that can be drop shipped anywhere. We're getting a lot of interest from places. This morning was Kenya and Nigeria. But these people that want to say, okay, I would like to be able to start, milling wood or milling local aluminum, or 3D printing using waste plastic in my local community instead of having to import everything that we buy. So it's this bridge where this high-tech, quote unquote high-tech technology can start really getting and becoming a utility for people, regardless of their reputation or their community's reputation as like a high-tech hub. Yeah, I think there's a huge potential for a lot of these technologies. We talk a lot about this a lot in the space room, to be able to like leapfrog some of the sunk cost of infrastructure in a lot of the quote unquote developed world. But from mobile markets, from mobile phones to satellites to general purpose manufacturing like what we do, there's just incredible potential.
Kind of just building off of what Audrey was saying, I'll turn back over Jim with things, but really quick, when he's talking about 3D printers specifically, and all these like rapid prototyping machines, when you start combining with the CNC and such, just being able to have devices that can essentially give very simple descriptions of what you need, or download a part and essentially it creates it. One thing that's amazing about this is it really forces us to go back to the basics of what parts do we actually need to make. Because you're not just buying it off of the supply chain somewhere. It's like, I actually need it right here. So what's fascinating is adapting it to the modern context has required the 3D printer people, as an example, to like go back, how do you make a gear? Like, how do you make one that essentially can actually be reliable in all these different contexts? And what's interesting is when you actually say, well, we can print it all in one go, the 3D printed gears are going to have different considerations than the CNC gears. Will have different from, the ones where you might laser cut them out of something.
Yeah, I mean, look, Alder, and I'm really excited to have you on and talk more about 3D printing, because I've always thought that 3D printing, decentralized 3D printing, can be truly transformative in certain markets. A big theme of what Untapped does is around decentralization, and I don't necessarily mean that in the cryptocurrency decentralization way, although there is a link to that, but really about, instead of relying on centralized institutions such as governments and large corporations for everything, allowing individuals and communities and smaller units, and they could be businesses, of course, to provide clean water, provide clean energy, provide basic services such as manufacturing an item. And one of the things that I think we've noticed too is that when you give people the tools for production, the amount of innovation that can happen to solve very basic problems, real problems, goes through the roof. And so I'd be very excited to see more 3D printing and expertise, of course, but also public 3D printing units out in certain communities. Have you seen that? Has anyone seen that in their communities? And if not, we should try it out.
Yeah, so so there is the standard like makerspace model where you have, standard like desktop 3D printers, maybe industrial CNC or a laser cutter, and you set it up in a warehouse somewhere and then you charge a subscription fee. That's how Tech Shop was built. That's how all these hacker spaces and maker spaces are built. And that's definitely, something that a lot of people take advantage of. There, even libraries all over the US that have, 3D printers that you can rent time on. Not rent time because it's a library. But yeah, it's definitely, this powerful concept of distributed manufacturing is something that like really needs to be, more invested in. That's one of the things that we're trying to build is that we're trying to, like with our units, like it's a factory that can be drop shipped anywhere on the planet. And we really think that that is a powerful thing that needs to be out there because especially, what we're seeing with COVID is that the global supply chain is not as robust as we would like to think it is. I live right next to Stanford Medical Center here in the Bay Area, and during March there were literally, Stanford medical students on the side of the road begging for PPE, like holding up signs saying, "We need masks, we need shields," because the supply chain had fallen apart. So right. Absolutely, completely agree that we need to have a distributed manufacturing base.
Well, look, a call to action there for anybody who's out in the audience listening to this.
So
we need some maker spaces out in Kenya, in Mali, in everywhere. So yes,
good luck,
please,
guys.
please.
I'm actually working on a solution exactly like that. So if you navigate over to my Instagram, I'm making a mobile infrastructure system that can go on wheels that makes 9.5 kilowatts of power.
Amazing.
And harvests 8,000 gallons of water. And we're working with Precious Plastic. They are a plastic recycling maker. And you're able to put in plastic bottles on one end. And on the other side, it spits out filament for 3D printers. So at that point, you have.
So Moise, how do we find out more about this? How do we connect with you? Do you have Instagram?
My Instagram. So I received a grant from the American Solar Energy Association, and I've been matching it. I'm a programmer and engineer here in Seattle, and I've built this machine and set it up in my community. It's a very gang-ridden neighborhood here in the Central District in Seattle. So we're working with a bike club, by a Black Indigenous Person of Color bicycle club that gets bikes donated and given to them. They then fix them up and give them out to the kids in the community. And by having the solar trailer there, they're able to keep their program running longer without, relying on public or private funding to keep their program alive, because the rent is free. The utilities are free at this point because they're being generated and created by this machine, and they're able to have an educational and leadership program with tech and bicycles health.
So please tell us what your Instagram is, Moise. And
if you click on my profile,
somebody on our team will. Yeah. Okay. Great. Excellent.
So if you click on my profile, you can click on the Moise Santos, and you can see it there. And like I said, it's the size of a container, so it's scalable. Right now it's only 20 feet long, but we can easily make it 20, 30 feet long or 40 feet long and turn it into an official tractor trailer.
As a side note, Moise, and I'd love to hear from Alex, Jan, and Victor, who just joined us on the speaker floor too in a second. But as a side note, we have deployed in Kenya, we, meaning Untapped, have deployed in Kenya mobile solar powered irrigation units. They're essentially a small trailer with solar panels on it. But what we've done, and that's not rocket science per se, but what we've done is also added IoT or sensors and PAYGO systems to it, right? Which then makes it a service. So it's no longer, oh, you have to buy this machine.
Yep.
Oh, no, you have to go to this person to use it. No, anyone can use it as long as they pop coin in, a digital coin, of course.
Correct.
And now it creates a whole economy around that machine. So I'm very curious to see if there are applications of your trailer combined with PAYGO and smart asset financing that can be deployed in emerging markets to give power and those resources available to the whole community.
Yeah, because at this point, we have what we're trying to work with Starlink. So we're trying to bring telecom on board. We're working with Sense, the home digital energy monitor, to determine what goes on inside of the truck itself, inside of the electrical part. So they use artificial intelligence to determine what's going on inside the electrical panel. At that point, we know exactly how much power someone's using for so long a period of time. We're working with Wise. They're a Seattle-based electronic company. So yeah, just piecing it together and seeing who can use this. And I mean, like I said, we want to give it to the world. We don't want to sell it. I made the designs. I'm patenting them now. And I want to be the holder of the designs and everything, and just be able to sell them to nonprofits, and maybe even give them the designs out. Because like Alder said, infrastructure and factories are the biggest thing that we need right now.
Excellent. Alex and Jan and Victor, you guys have some comments.
I actually would like to introduce myself to the group and ask the group for some resources in terms of research. I'm an MBA student right now at George Washington University, and we've been assigned to help a fintech company in Ghana scale their operations and work with, and they're also doing a funding round. And so I'm looking for anyone in the network who understands kind of the marketing landscape and product growth landscape in Ghana, and who I could connect with offline. If you have any like reports you could send my way, or anything like that, please.
Actually, just Alex on that, we're raising $25 million in equity at the moment for a Ghanaian company that does financing in the field. So there isn't any market research, by the way. But maybe if you want to connect with me offline, maybe I can be helpful.
Thanks, Victor.
I was also going to say, I just was going to jump in because I was working and living with a tech incubator in Accra for over the past 2 years-ish. But were you saying it's a fintech company in Ghana? Sorry, I missed the industry.
Yeah, fintech with a focus on mobile money, and they're like a layer. I look at them as like a layer 2 protocol. They're not, and they're kind of interfacing between established companies like telcos and banks, and like small and medium-sized businesses or retail, giving them the ability to pay with mobile money. Or
if it's any use, we're involved from an investment perspective with 2 companies in Nigeria, so very close to Ghana, Anglophone as well, that there may be some relevance, and I think there might even be some plans for expansion that does exactly that, creating a single set of APIs for banks in Nigeria, but also creating banking as a service for various companies to be able to access fintech services. So I don't know if it's helpful, but I'm happy to connect you with them so that you might be able to capture some information.
Thanks, guys. I'll reach out to all of you individually. Thank you.
Perfect. Jan, love to hear your thoughts.
Hello, Jim, and thanks a lot for having me here on stage. Alex, there's this Ghana Tech Summit community. Have you heard of that? If not, might be very interesting for you. This is it's part of the global ecosystem initiative, and it's growing pretty big there, and many people around.
Thank you. I'll look it up.
And we can connect on LinkedIn, of course. And I have one question actually. I'm running a translation company, and on the other hand, I'm leading a global community around business people from our localization industry just come together and chat and meet like we do here on Clubhouse, actually. And we're now approaching Africa, and trying to build up communities there. Now, I would love to hear your ideas and your view on where do you see all these tech you have been mentioning before? Where's the most active community from your point of view? Where do you see, where's the most vibe in Africa at this moment?
Ooh, that's a politically charged question, Jan. I don't know if we can pick favorites. No, I'm joking a bit. Look, I think everybody will probably have a thing to say because it is a very large continent, obviously, and a lot of things going on. But I would say that there is a tremendous amount of innovation happening in East Africa, in Kenya, of course, Uganda, Rwanda, and some of the technologies that we mentioned just earlier. Inspira Farms, for example, that is based out of Kenya, and Desalinator, although they are a Dutch-based company, they're quite active in the Middle East. And in Rwanda, you may have heard, but the president last year, in 2019, I should say, announced a strategic shift towards electric vehicles. So there's a tremendous amount of investment into electric vehicles. In Uganda, there's a sense of a free market, free for all around implementing new technology. So I feel that area of the world is quite vibrant. All that said, there's quite a bit of, I would say, consumer product innovation as well in Nigeria, just simply because of the massive market that there is in Nigeria. But there's innovation and entrepreneurship throughout. I don't know if that was a good overview or not, and I'm sure there's somebody on this call that will dispute me. Yeah, please do if there are.
Definitely, thanks a lot so far. The follow-up question would be: does language actually,
Jim,
all there's?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead and finish,
Jim,
Jan, and then we'll come to you, Claire, in 1 second.
Sure.
Go ahead and finish, Jan.
Sure.
Okay, just how does language impact business in Africa? I mean, do you feel that all this adoption you're talking about is problematic due to the many languages spoken on the continent?
Yeah, I don't know if I can comment on that one. I'm sure some others would. Any comments on that one from the audience?
Not as much as you would think.
Another thing to throw out here, just randomly, the translation technology right now, it's more focused on like European languages and Asian stuff, but I know that there's a number of languages being translated on the African continent. The auto translation tools are actually starting to get really good. What I find is interesting is that while we do have international languages that we use for international business and such, there's an enormous potential for essentially, as these consumer products essentially are going out to every single tribal village with like cell phones and such, many of them will be shipping with technologies that enable cross-cultural communications. What does it mean when you've got 1 billion people that can speak the English or Chinese and have it translated or have their native language translated back and forth? It's going to be a really interesting thing for cultural communications if that technology can get even slightly better.
Thanks, Chris. Claire, over to you. Thanks for waiting.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for putting me up here. Appreciate the space here. Just was going to answer Jan, because you were asking about opportunities there, and Jim, you mentioned Eastern Africa. Just want to mention Rwanda is doing a tremendous job in terms of positioning itself.
Indeed.
And have really seen that, have worked with people who are doing startups there. And in terms of language, I honestly second Victor, that is absolutely not a barrier at all, because you have the majority of the people speaking anyhow. English documents most of the documents are in English. And like Chris said, we have advanced translations that are taking place across the continent. So that should not be an issue.
Indeed. I mean, my experience is that with English and French, you can talk to the majority of the continent.
And French, exactly. Yeah.
Right. And then, a little bit of Portuguese, I'm sure, helped, although I've never been to Angola, so I can't speak to that.
Usually when companies are looking to broaden out across the whole continent, the biggest step function is Arabic. The rest are not really
Right.
step functions.
Right, indeed.
True.
So actually, we have some Arabic speakers on the floor now. I mean, we can give them the chance if they want to join the speaker stage if they want to. But I'm curious to hear about the technology question more from a North African Arabic-speaking Middle East perspective as well. So if there's anyone on the call with that perspective, please join us. I also noted that Naima and Kingsley joined us as well. Would either of you like to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of reply to the question of language to piggyback off of what Claire said. She kind of took what I was going to say, that Africans in most places, the continent's 11.7 million square miles, which is crazy, but most Africans speak multiple languages. And that's obviously because of the relations with colonialism, but also like, you know, just interactions with other places. Where my family's from in Somalia, my family speaks multiple languages, having come from Somalia. So they grew up speaking Italian and English and Somali and Arabic. And a lot of African countries have similar stories. Obviously, when you get into more tribal or traditional communities, the languages tend to vary, but most Africans, due to the relationships with other places in the world, speak multiple languages, and languages literally almost never a barrier when work wants to get done. So
Yeah,
that's my
indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in there and maybe give a little bit of perspective from a Cameroonian angle. So many of you may be aware that Cameroon is bilingual. So you've got parts of Cameroon that speaks predominantly English and the other one French. So that means if you were to venture or work with people from Cameroon, then you'll be comfortable talking to them in either language. I think the challenge that we face in Cameroon is slightly different from what you guys have been talking about, and that really relates to the infrastructure around helping founders, startup founders like myself, who are operating within Cameroon. I'm going to jump on that later on, but thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thanks for that, Kingsley. We also have Mo on, who just joined us, who is, I think, from the Arabic-speaking part of the world. Love to hear your perspective.
Yes, I am. Thanks. I'm actually from Yemen, but I saw the topic. Targeting towards the Old Tech Revitalize for today, and I wanted to chip in some thoughts of a startup that I've been working on Nigeria. I'm not sure I can answer the question regarding the North African countries. I've lived the last 6 years of my life outside Yemen and never done business back home. But if I may, just probably a thought of exchange. I'm working regarding Old Tech. Currently, I work with Green Tech Capital. I think some of the audience here might know it.
Indeed, very well known, yes.
Yeah, and one of our portfolio companies, Power Stove, is currently, they are in the business of manufacturing cooking stoves. I think find it a very fascinating idea how they, understood most of apparently more than 95% of Nigerian households until today still cook using kerosene or charcoals, and they came up with a cook stove that that burns pellets like gas. So we're talking about biomass here, and once that stove is on, it generates electricity. So, and then there comes the third product, which is like an electricity kit. Let's call it a solar home system, whether it's a mini electricity kit of like a TV or some bulbs, and whereby you can charge your phone as well. Very interesting, a very interesting approach. At the moment, I think the reason I'm saying this, at the moment we're looking for some sort of partnerships in this space of IoT. So the plan—
That's me.
Yeah, nice. So we are trying to integrate some sort of an IoT monitoring device to monitor how, how those stoves actually like save carbon dioxide, like offset carbon dioxide emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, we would be able, with Power Stove, we can apply for carbon credits. And with those carbon certificates, these can be traded at carbon exchange, whereby companies that emit carbon dioxide can actually pay for companies that offset carbon dioxide, which is very fascinating. This is something that we discovered right now, and we're trying to like integrate some sort of a system in there. Yeah, just
I think technically that sounds very quite easy.
Yeah,
so,
extremely easy.
Yeah,
extremely easy.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to get in touch. Feel free to get in touch with us as well at Untapped. You know, our business model is very much focused on something that we call smart asset financing. And the idea there is that with data, such as the data that you're pulling in from the stoves, we can offer financing on productive assets. So if the stoves are being used to cook meals or to provide other business services, then with the data that's coming from those devices and combining that with pay-go or pay-as-you-go controls on that asset, we would love to finance those type of things. So the whole idea is to really make use of assets and repayment accountable. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, definitely we should talk, because I mean, also regarding the pay-go, right now we are trying to draft a strategy regarding how we can integrate a whole pay-go system into the business. We're in talk with a couple of banks, with a couple of APIs that already exist in the continent, but eventually we would also require some sort of, we would definitely want to help them raise from other investors. So I'll definitely reach out to you.
Great, thanks,
Awesome.
Mo. Excellent. So we are nearing the end of our hour. I did want to open up for any additional questions or comments from the audience or from anybody on the stage as well. But before we do that, just a quick note. This is a session sponsored by or hosted by Untapped, and we manage an investment network called The Nest. Our goal is to really connect entrepreneurs from frontier markets with investors worldwide and really create conversations like these and facilitate more investment and entrepreneurship in emerging markets, including Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And if you'd like to find out more about us, we are at untapped-inc.com, or more easy to remember, findthenest.org. So feel free to get in touch and see if we can work together. And final note is that this is being recorded live, and we are hosting these kinds of conversations every week, same time, same place. Chris, go ahead.
All right, so I just got a quick little thing to throw out here for concerning room full of investors, just as something to consider, not just as an individual investment opportunity, but as long-term infrastructure development. Often we think of this as something that's long and huge and requires huge government resources. Something to just throw out there. So we've got experts here in 3D printing as an example of something that can be done very interestingly. 3D printers on the lower end can be done very, very cheaply. We're looking at about less than $200 to $300. As a comparison, you're looking at the entire continent of Africa has a little over 1.2 billion people, let's say 1 billion people. If you basically had groupings of 1,000 people, so let's say like every village or community essentially has access to a 3D printer, to do that scheme would only cost between $200 and $300 million. If you deal with a development bank or some sort of things financed, you get that for under 30 million a year. That's the sort of thing where there's $1 billion of capital being deployed to Africa from foreign investment.
And I can just imagine how much value it would unlock in the
extremely amount, yeah.
Because you're investing in actual manufacturing capacity. So rather than building a single facility or a single building with one place, you're looking at basically having the entire continent having knowledge transfer and having the ability so that every kid's growing up with the same tools used at the highest in research labs on the planet. The other cool thing is a lot of these 3D printers, the newer ones, have the ability to self-upgrade. So essentially, the more that you use it, the more essentially that you learn about it, the more you're able to actually use the parts that come out of it to make it better and better and more customized to the application. We start combining this like solar pumps and other things like this. You're looking at the ability to have a repair infrastructure. So you no longer have like the giant piles of dead technology that you're talking to, Jim. All I'm just going to say, and before I turn it over with things, is just saying, consider the opportunities not just to be individual in specific places. The entire continent is ripe for opportunity.
So I echo that, and I just wanted to, and I love the power of the crowd here. I love a comment from somebody on LinkedIn, on our chat in LinkedIn. The company, a 3D printing company that's doing this in Kenya, is called ultrared.biz. Ultra red, the color red, .biz. So check that out. Yes, I'm excited. You know, I thought about it and it was kind of in the back of my mind, but now that it's being raised here, definitely we'll have to investigate more about 3D printing of decentralized 3D printing and mini maker spaces throughout Africa. That sounds like an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think the maker spaces are going to be the ones, man. Is the fact that you're able to deploy a full all-in-one system to small villages where they can all co-own the piece of property or hardware.
So as someone who speaks to communities pretty much all day, every day about getting these facilities out to them, their two main concerns are finance and power. You know, we have power protections built in, but I've already reached out to Moise, and I'll reach out to you, Jim, because it sounds like you're dealing with the power end. But the finance thing is definitely something that we're constantly trying to figure out.
Oh, we're dealing with the finance end too, right? So potentially we can put both of those things together. You know, how incredible would it be? This is just, you know, crazy brainstorming here, crazy ideas time, because it's 9 a.m. now. What if we were able to finance and power creative or these mini maker spaces in all parts of the continent, and take a share of the revenues of the inventions that come out of that? I mean, that would just be incredible.
Can we do a room just on that? That would be amazing.
Indeed.
So, Jim, if I can just jump out there and use the opportunity to introduce myself to all of you guys, because I've noticed that many of you are involved in moving goods into the African continent, or from one African country to the other. One thing that you may be well aware is the infrastructure challenges that exist on the African continent, and as such, you may have experienced damage to cargo either by way of road accidents or thefts, or even damage to your goods while at sea. My name is Kingsley, and I own a startup called Optimus, and we are automating cargo claims for cargo owners, cargo insurers, and for shipping lines. And our focus is to help particularly those on the African continent who may have suffered damage to the cargo in transit to be able to manage their claims properly. So if any of you have such a need, please do check my contacts on my bio, and I'll be happy to talk to you guys.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kingsley. And there are two more people that just joined us. Before I jump to Val and Tim, just a quick note: if you are interested in potentially financing, and you have an incredible technology, and you have productive use of that technology, and you can monitor it and control it from afar, we want to hear from you. So please email us at deals@untapped-inc.com. That's deals@untappedinc.com. All right, over to you, Val and Tim. Any comments?
Hey, Jim, Lundy, thank you so much for what you guys are doing. I've been listening for a while, and it's quite refreshing to have a discussion focused around emerging markets. I live in New York, and I'm the Chief Investment Officer of Bervan. We are a private equity and asset management firm. And we've been working a lot with a few South Asian and Latin America and African fund managers over the course of the past 12 months. And we've been hearing a lot of good things. I'm interested in hearing a lot about the negatives, the challenges, right? Because I feel like sometimes managers feel like if they keep talking about what's negative, we're not going to put up the money. But that's not true. The idea is to understand what we're dealing with so that we can bring the big checks. The two things I want to talk about were the infrastructure, the regulation, and probably the pandemic challenges. Africa, for instance, being a new market. What kind of challenges are you guys facing in finding curated opportunities, or are they mostly opportunities that you guys have to build up from the ground? And how are you guys dealing with the lack of regulation in most markets? And the last thing would be with the pandemic, for a lot of people living in North America who have invested in Africa or have ongoing commitments, how are you guys managing it with that, the restriction of movement? Thank you.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I want to give others the opportunity to jump in before I dominate the floor. Anyone?
Yeah, I would just, I don't want to be a master of things, but I disagree, Val. I think we need to be changing the narrative of the African continent and its people. I think there are a lot of things that are happening. There's, for example, the AFCFTA that is being discussed in the continent, and then these are stories we need to be pushing. I am based in Switzerland. I'm born in Zimbabwe, and I do have a lot of circles that are in the wealth management area. And when I've asked for portfolios for the emerging markets, it's very minimal. And the reason is because of the narratives that are being pushed. And I understand there are challenges, that is true, but there are many opportunities. And honestly, when I brought Rwanda to Jan, Rwanda is an extremely model country for the continent. And then these are stories that need to be made clear to everyone who wants to invest. There's also the other side, the African diaspora. I think in this conversation, I'm glad that it's a mix. And Jim, thank you for bringing up a mix of people here, because we need to be interacting together, African diaspora, the Africans, the foreign direct investors, and discussing together, because that's the only way that Africa is going to become more beneficial to everyone. So I really strongly disagree with what you say there.
So, thanks for that, Claire. Thanks for that, Claire. So I want to address that a little bit, Val, and others feel free to jump in after my comment. But look, I think one of the issues is that the investment models, investment instruments that we often use in markets like Africa or the markets in Africa aren't created to fit those markets. So, for example, there's a lot of talk about venture capital in Africa and how, I think whether it's said or unsaid, private equity, venture capital, that's going to be the saving grace for the continent. Well, if you look at how things work, especially in venture capital, a 2% management fee and 20% carry, that really comes from a different market and really only benefits asset-light, quick-scale businesses with a nice big IPO exit market. When the continent is really in need of massive CapEx financing. And so you have this disconnect between, okay, sure, there are opportunities around asset-light venture capital. Look at all the great digital banking that's happening. FinTech is big, InsurTech is big. But then that leaves out so much of the rest of the economy that is desperately searching for some place to get CapEx financing. And really, the way the things are done, only the largest companies can access traditional debt. So how do we fix that? How do we give more entrepreneurs access to the kind of financing that they need to scale? So I think some of those questions, we need to really innovate on how we finance innovation, not just do cut and paste what we've done in other markets and pray that it works in Africa.
Spot on.
Yep.
Thank you, Jim. This is really refreshing, and that's what I'm going for. And Claire, when I say those things, I don't mean to build a negative narrative. Because we have access to large and massive capital, we always try to look at things on a macro level, because we like what people are doing today, because it took people to go to China, Korea before for the world to see that there was a big opportunity there. So the work that venture capital have been doing in Africa, it's actually serving as a vitrine and a platform for a lot of investors who otherwise would have never considered going there. I just want to look at it on a macro level, and I love what Jim just said, because I think it's important, if we want to make significant fundamental change, to understand what is really that bigger portion that we're living on the ground. The $1 to $3 billion that people have invested so far in Africa are really nothing compared to what can go there.
Yeah. Nothing.
Because investing in Africa is actually a great business.
Huge business.
But we're trying to find out what is and I appreciate you. I think the way you say it is the way to go. If we could dissect it, maybe at a different session for the sake of time, but I like the direction.
Well, I like that. So maybe next week we can have a section or discussion about whether venture capital is even the right model for Africa. I think would be a really healthy one. But I just give you a quick statistic. According to the World Bank, a study that they did in 2017, there is a $3.9 trillion, not billion, $trillion financing gap for small and medium-sized businesses in emerging markets. And of that 3.9 trillion, over half a trillion is in Africa. So I'm not saying that all of that opportunity is financeable, but there is a big chunk that's being missed today by using traditional financing models. And I think there's some innovation I've seen that's addressing that, more digital lending with digital credit scores and so on, but there needs to be more. And I think, that's one of the things that we're trying to spearhead at Untapped, which is how do we lend safely and effectively to SMEs in the continent so we can capture that opportunity and unlock value.
Absolutely. I love what you said, Jim, there on the next room that you're planning, because there is an article, a lot actually, that's circulating around on the hidden worth of the global African diaspora, and that's something that's not spoken about so often. I think it's something we need to consider, that some of the models that are being used to try to benefit Africa, to grow the continent, or to expand this growth capital markets, might not be the right one. We don't need to copy paste. We really need to rethink that, and I think the African diaspora should be a big part of that.
Yeah, indeed. Well, there's a bit of a plug for Untapped, but we believe that what we have is smart asset financing, which is essentially IoT-backed lending to SMEs for equipment. I think that is one of potentially many answers. So we hope we hope to do much more with that over the next years.
Jim, I'm curious. One of the managers we spoke to mentioned that a lot of the money that is being sent to Africa is actually going to company where majority stakeholders are not necessarily African descent, foreigners.
And there's a question. Let me give you another statistic here, and I'll let you finish. So I just have to jump in. Village Capital and WeTracker recently did two separate independent studies, and we did a session on this. And this might be yet another good Clubhouse chat. But close to 90% of all VC funding going to Kenyan startups in the last years have gone to white foreign founders. Right? Let that sink in. 90%. Wow. Now, we had a long discussion back in August about why we think that is. You can jump to many conclusions here, right? The worst being, oh yeah, we're all racist, which we are, but it's not quite that simple. It's about networks, it's about exposure. And, again, one of the reasons we're creating these forums is so that people can have direct conversations. Because one of the big reasons that happens is because of networks. People from the outside are rich enough and connected enough to be able to raise funding more easily. But anyway, I don't want to open up a can of worms today because it's already past time, and I want to let you finish what you were saying, Val. So sorry for cutting you off, Val. Please go ahead.
No problem. You've been extremely helpful because I'm really about getting into what the problem is, because I feel like we are more efficient when we know what we're dealing with. Absolutely. And I think if investing in Africa only makes sense for our firm if it will actually benefit Africans. Yeah. And when I asked the question about the challenges and infrastructure and regulations, I feel like one of the reasons why most of the capital goes to foreigners is because it is said that a lot of Africans are not ready. Either they don't have the proper infrastructure to get to those curated deals, or some of the governments are working against the progress of their own country. And investors feel the need to protect themselves, and they just invest with people they know already.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's loads of reasons. I mean, I think one of the interesting challenges is the proportion of the money coming into Africa for investing is from the outside. And I'm a bit of a very practical person here. At the end of the day, every fund, every PE fund, every venture fund, whatever fund manager needs to pitch or sell an idea to investors, to LPs. And if all the LPs are coming from overseas with their own preconceptions and misconceptions oftentimes of what the opportunity is, then everything gets screwed up. So, I think we need to see more Africans investing in Africa. And to do so, we need better vehicles to do that, to allow for that to happen. Yeah, again, there are probably many issues, but I think that is one of the issues. We need to make investing more local.
Yeah, Jim, you need to open another room on that.
We have too many conversations going. Yeah, indeed. But I see that Raj Kulasingham and Zuwa has just joined us.
Hey, Jim.
Hey, Raj. Happy to have you here. Love to hear your comments.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I was on that chat on the Nest when we talked about it, and kind of a few observations of that. One is, why is it Kenya that this seems to be the biggest problem? Because Kenya is a kind of cool place to live, right? People go and hang out in Kenya. They do their university, they take a gap year to go to Kenya and they hang out there. You don't see this many complaints about this in Nigeria or South Africa or Ghana or whatever. So that's the first observation I had. I think the other point, I think completely agree with you that, it's about trying to get more local capital involved. And, that's something that that I've been trying to do with Vishal to try and get more in Kenya, for example.
And by the way, Vishal is a local Kenyan investor.
Yeah, exactly. So trying to get more local entrepreneurs who have traditionally been investing in real estate and manufacturing to see this as an interesting asset class. So I think it's changing. I don't think we should, I think capital is capital. I don't think we should sort of, say that it's bad because it's happened in the past, but I think we just got to change the future.
Yes, well, changing the future is definitely the direction we want to go.
Yeah, if I
there's
could
one
just
other
add to
person
that.
who just, Zuwa, please.
Sure. Thanks, Jim, and thanks everyone for your amazing contributions so far. I did join just a tad bit late, but I really sort of wanted to latch on to that idea of alternative, funding that can really sort of kickstart a lot of the SME financing that is needed on the continent. So I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and I've been mostly in the legal and governance and policy space, and I founded an organization called Governance Africa, and what we do is we're young, Africans from different technical backgrounds, and we advise African governments and regional bodies on policy implementation and sort of innovation. And one of the innovative projects we were working on in 2019, 2018 was called the African Digital Asset Framework. And essentially what it was a project to allow Africans in the continent and in the diaspora to be able to fund SMEs through this digital platform powered by blockchain technology. And where we came in as Governance Africa was trying to create a sandbox standard, and we engaged with the African Union because I've heard the term regulation put out a few times, and with traditional banking and unfortunately sometimes archaic banking regulations, these type of means of funding become hard for the markets to be able to cater to. So what we did, we were developing a sandbox, and I think the conversation with the African Union and African Development Bank in that regard were pretty productive. And the final project is not yet out in terms of the sandbox, the regulatory sandbox that we're trying to create as a standard. But I really do see that being a means for SMEs to receive funding and to sort of jump on what Claire had said, to involve the diaspora in a very significant way as well.
So how do we get diaspora more involved? Because I think that's a common refrain that I hear. How do we get, we need more diaspora involved, but it often seems hard to engage beyond international remittances. How do we create that appropriate forum?
Well, I think, again, to sort of plug this African digital asset framework, I think, remittances typically are given to help with upkeep and lifestyle and necessities on the continent. And there's no framing of the funds going back to the continent in regards to funding of businesses, of investing in businesses. And I think once that narrative is changed and once products are available that can clearly allow the diaspora to identify and send money towards a particular venture on the continent, I think that's going to make that involvement of the diaspora much scalable.
Great, thanks for that comment. We have a new person on as well, AE. Did you have some comments?
Yeah, it's Anthony.
Anthony.
The main reason I came on to this platform is to meet with people who are in Africa and in the specific industries, as we're looking to expand into Africa and more heavily invest in Africa, because most of the founders here in our investment office are Nigerian by background, and we want to tap back into the roots. So open to connecting with people who have any investment opportunities in the 3 verticals that we focus on, one being renewable energy, venture capital, and thirdly, real estate. So yeah.
Okay, well, definitely. I think we're quite active in both of those areas. So we'll definitely get in touch. I'm sure there's others on this call as well.
Perfect, thanks.
Well, everybody, we're way over time, but we have some great topics for the next chat. I think I would like to leave it with everybody with perhaps just a kind of open question to everybody. What should our next topic be?
Real quick, do you mind if I ask?
Oh yes, Tim, please. Yes. Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so grateful for this app. It's I'm new to it, but it's just so awesome to be able to connect with people all around the world, and I'm just eternally grateful for this experience. I'm here in the United States, and I'm currently working like 84-hour weeks with the objective to buy land to be able to help feed my community here. I noticed there's a lot of food insecurity in my area, and I just feel like I need to do my part. But
where are you, Tim?
I'm in Louisiana, in the United States. I imagine food insecurity is relative, but it just breaks my heart to see the food bank lines as long as they are. And I feel like I need to do my part. I'm really passionate about food. And I recently worked on a farm, and I've learned some skills that I think I can provide these skills to my community. So I'm working towards getting land. But I'm also passionate about tech, and just passionate about humanity, and just serving people in general. And hearing you guys speak, I'm wondering how, like, an average person like me, who's, I'm making decent capital, relative, I suppose, but I'm also working my face off to get it. But I'm wondering, like, how an average person like me can maybe get involved in helping serve the African communities through, like, maybe investing. And I'm not like someone who can drop like millions of dollars, but I'm someone who can maybe drop like thousands of dollars, maybe, and try to serve in that way. Because I imagine it could go.
All right, this is going to be really cheesy here, because I'm going to make a direct plug for something that we're launching next month, or it's available now, but it's going to get relaunched next month. But we've created, we mean Untapped, we've created a platform, a digital platform, where investors like you can go online and invest small amounts or large amounts, whatever amounts you want, and have that money go directly to assets on the ground in Africa. And once you make that investment, you get real-time feedback or data on exactly what is happening with your money, how much money you've made, but also what kind of impact you're making for those entrepreneurs in the form of how much additional revenue they've generated. And you can track where your money is going, what assets it's going to, and so on. So I would, we're launching it next month. So I would say, please stand by. But the whole idea for creating this platform is essentially to make it more mainstream. We want to make investing in Africa as easy as investing in the stock market. And until that happens, Africans are going to put their money somewhere else. Africans in Africa will put their money somewhere else. Developed country investors will put their money somebody else. And I'm hoping that with a platform like this, we'll see more capital flow into the continent directly to entrepreneurs and really have the impact and be able to see that impact in real time.
That sounds amazing. I'm following you on this app just now, and so you said Untapped. Should I go to your website, or what's the best way to stay updated on that?
Yes, untapped-inc.com. And again, we're going to have a launch next week, so stay tuned next week for a launch. And I'll take a note of your information and make sure that you get access to it as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So sorry for the plug, guys, but it was so relevant that I had to, and I didn't pay Tim, by the way, just to make sense.
I was gonna say, but what a positive note to end on, Tim. That was really kind.
Indeed.
Jim, you organize it, so you're allowed to plug, so it's okay.
I suppose. Well, again, thank you everybody for being on, and I really appreciate everybody's feedback and participation. So I hope to see you here again next week. 8 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. GMT, and 7 p.m. East Africa time for another conversation. And I am sure it'll be just as lively and enlightening as this was today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks
Stay
a lot.
safe.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
Bye-bye.